Welcome to part 11 of Mapping Osiris. So when you begin to do a little bit of research on Osiris, you discover that there are two main, what they call cult centers for Osiris. One exists in Busiris, and that's located in the middle of the Nile Delta. You're probably familiar with that by now. And the other is located in Abydos. Abydos is basically south, located fairly close to Luxor, a little bit north of that. The confusion seems to arise when they began to talk about when Osiris was cut into 14 pieces and placed all over the Nile. And so they came up with this folk tale that his head was buried in Abydos. But yet there is no ancient texts, and when I say that I mean the Book of the Dead, the Pyramid texts, any of these concrete texts that mention anything about his head being associated to Abydos. In fact, it was actually a tale. Because of the tale, a shrine was risen because of that, conveniently. And what I see so very often is that, as I begin to uncover this stuff, is that it seems as though every step of the way somebody has done something to twist something around and turn it backwards or what have you. And thankfully, because of the recent discoveries, we're going to be able to prove this that is not Abydos that is associated to his head. Right here I'm reading, it says, another version of the story indicates that as soon as she heard of this tragedy, Isis set out to search for the fragments of her husband's body, embalmed them with the help of the netter Anubis, and buried them wherever they were found. According to this version of the story, the head of Osiris was buried at Abydos. The heart was buried on the island of Philae, near Aswan. The phallus was thrown into the Nile and was swallowed by a fish. For this reason, the eating of fish was forbidden to the priests. Another tradition says that Anubis, Isis, assembled the embalmed fragments and buried them all at Abydos. Okay, well, so we have all of these different stories, but we have no ancient texts that really mention any of this at all. But what has happened is because of the popularity of Abydos, that people have assumed that it was the head buried at Abydos. We're going to prove that that's not correct. And I believe that there is probably a little bit of design behind that, because it seems that over every step of the way there is this confusion, because if you turn it the other way around, obviously you'll stop dead in your tracks if you don't know what to look for. But there's plenty of evidence that we will see that Busiris is actually the place where the head is associated to Osiris. Now, personally, I don't care where his head was buried. That's not what's important. The issue that I take is that because they claimed through a tale that his head was buried in Abydos, then they associate with the head to Abydos. That's where I take an issue, because that would be incorrect. Why is this important? Well, I think it's extremely important, because if you take a look at what the ancient Egyptians were doing along the Nile, then you clearly see that they were associating, metaphorically, certain areas to the body. And so if you turn everything around, it stops somebody in their tracks. If you want to be able to continue putting the pieces of the puzzle together, it's important that you understand how everything is placed on the Nile. And as you can see, what happens when you have words only and no images, like I've spoken about before, you just have people throwing body parts in various places. You have people throwing the heart here in Philae, you have somebody throwing the phallus in the Nile and what have you, and all these stories arise. But you have no real insight, because you don't understand the way that the Egyptians were thinking when they were talking about these various areas on the Nile, metaphorically. But once you do, everything becomes really clear. So in order to attack this investigation, let's take a look at Osiris hieroglyph. This hieroglyph that you see right here is obviously, it's a man with an eye, and this is a throne, so it's an eye and a throne. But let's listen to E.A. Wallace Budge from Fetish to God in Ancient Egypt. He interpreted a lot of the ancient texts, but let's hear what he has to say about it. It says we may now compare the cuneiform characters for Asari, that is Marduk, and the transcription of them into hieroglyphs, the group of wedges which we read Asari, and it is composed of two distinct characters. These letters are depicted using standard typewriter characters. Most closely approximate the wedge-like characters of the cuneiform text. The first has the well-known meaning of tent, or dwelling, or resting place. And the second has the meaning of eye, and is placed inside the sign for tent. The two signs by which these are transcribed in Egyptians are a seat, or throne, and an eye. Now the sign minus equal I is followed in the text by two other cuneiform characters. These form a title of Asari, and are read in Sumerian Ludug, and they mean good man or being. Thus we have Asari, the good being, but we find in the Egyptian text that one of the principal titles for Osiris is Un-Nefer, which is also the good being, and it seems clear that the title is the Egyptian translation of the cuneiform characters meaning good man or being. Thus there is little doubt that the Egyptian Asar, which is Osiris' real name, the Osiris name was a Greek name. Asar was the original Egyptian name. So we see Asari, we see Asar, and basically he's saying that they're the same. But then we also have the offset of Ashur as well, which is another one. These are all variations of Asar or Osiris. And we see, it says, so the constellation of Orion was associated with Osiris, who was in turn immediately associated with Marduk, the founder of the first temple which mirrored the sky on the earth. Doesn't that sound familiar? Now, I don't wish to digress, but it doesn't stop there. We can look across culture, and we're going to constantly see this tie to Orion, from the Mayans to even Brahma. And, all of these guys seem to be tied to Orion. What's really interesting, too, is based on the information that we've been finding out lately, is that this is not about some separate being or something that somebody else is worshiping. What it actually ends up being about is a system of enlightenment. And when we take a look at these other hieroglyphs, which we will eventually, such as Ashur and these various trees of life, where you see the guys holding the pine cone up to the winged disc. The winged disc basically is the same thing as the eye on the throne. It's just a different way of depicting it. And I have been looking at this hieroglyph that sits above the tree of life on the Babylonian tree, and these other ones, and I'm seeing some definite similarities in the way they are doing their hieroglyphs, because you can actually place the spinal column inside these as well, and the winged disc at the top actually serves as the inner part of the brain. So we see this common thing going on. And so interestingly, just like everything else that we see in this world, everything is backwards. So now they've got everybody programmed and worshiping and putting something up on a pedestal, and people aren't raising their consciousness at all. They're just dumbed down, and we all know who those people are. We don't have to talk about them in the video specifically, but the people that are controlling them, we know who they are as well. So all of these, interestingly, we have Orion being demonized, we have Osiris and ancient Egypt being demonized, we have all these various cultures being demonized. And yet when we take a look at them, they seem to be performing systems of enlightenment. They seem to be excellent at anatomy. They seem to share a common knowledge of phi, an understanding of the human body that far surpassed anybody at that time. And so these are the types of questions that you should be asking as we continue to dig into this kind of information. Have these people been lying to you? Well, of course they have. So we're going to keep digging into this real quick. So we know that the eye on a throne represents Osiris. It represents the pineal gland, basically. And so we need to establish where the soul is. And there's a previous video of mine called the pineal gland is the seat of the soul. This is also what the ancient Egyptians believed as well. When you go in and out of the temples, you see the winged disc here, and that is associated with the central pineal gland. The reason it was put above the doors, and you can check this with Magical Egypt and also not E.A. Wallace Budge, but R.A. Schwaller Lubbock's. The reason it was placed here is because as we enter and leave our body, they did the same thing with the temples. We would enter the temple through the pineal gland, we would leave the temple through the pineal gland. And also you can cross-reference this against the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because the Tibetan Book of the Dead speaks that there is a 49-day period for a soul to be able to inhabit another body. And interestingly, it takes 49 days for the pineal gland to form in a fetus. So there is this constant speak of, and then also we're going to see where this is associated to Osiris and Busiris as well. Now the term Busiris basically means the house of Osiris. And the house of Osiris, Osiris being the eye in a throne, it would be the place of the eye. Where the eye is located is basically what that would come down to. And it says here in utterance 410 of the pyramid text that, O Busirite, thou, and Dd means Jed pillar, he who is in his, and this right here basically means in the place where his soul is found. And we could pull this up in Alan Gardner's Egyptian grammar, and we can see that right here, GRG, found or established, and the B, A, which this is an A here, this is Ba for soul. So this is where Busiris is, the place and the soul is found. And this is also the place where Ra and Osiris souls embraced. There is no mention of the soul and its embracing or anything like this in Abydos. But also, even more importantly, there is a definite association between the soul and the pineal gland. Even if you wanted to believe that it was the heart wouldn't work for either place, because the heart is in the middle of both of them. So the soul, according to the ancient Egyptians, was in the pineal gland, that's in the head, and we see a clear association to Busiris in that area. This is from E.A. Wallace Budge and the Egyptian Book of the Dead here, and it says here, grant thou glory in heaven and power upon earth and triumph in otherworld and a sailing down the river to Busiris in the form of a living soul. So there we have Busiris, an association to soul again. And here we have a hieroglyph showing that Osiris and Ra, their souls embracing and meeting in Busiris. And so basically what we've established is that this area refers to the place where the soul is found. It obviously cannot be the heart, because the heart would be in the middle of Egypt. And it obviously is not Abydos, because Abydos is completely on the opposite side of Egypt. So therefore what that tells us is that Busiris is the place where the head is. But we have one more final thing to take a look at here that just kind of puts the nail in the coffin. Having now taken a little extra time to find out what these ancient Egyptians were doing, and as we've seen, the whole Nile and the Nile Delta, basically what the ancient Egyptians were doing is they were referring to things metaphorically. For the longest time, all of the various texts that I've seen, as they said, Busiris was the mystical place where the soul is found. And they just left it at that, because there were no visuals, there was no images or visions that popped in your head when you heard it. You just said, okay, well this place is the place where the soul is found, but that's it. But when you start realizing that these places along the Nile have to do with the human body, and it becomes clear. And so, when we take a look, and all of this, by the way, as we have shown, the Nile and the Nile Delta map to the human body using phi. We can see this clearly as we go up the Nile, and we can see how this veers off to the left really sharply and travels up the spinal cord. And I have shown you, you can see how this opens up into the skull just like it does a normal skull, and how the waterways follow. All of this I've shown you before. And this area right here, the place where the soul is found, after mapping it all and laying out the human body the way it's supposed to be, the place where the soul is found, it not only confirms that the area is the pineal gland, but it also confirms that Busiris is the place where the head is associated to, not Abydos. And I believe that there are secrets up here. As I've shown you before, reality and the pyramid, the Great Pyramids and so forth, show things that if anybody does know about this, and I'm not really too sure that anybody knows the depth that I've pulled out of this stuff yet. Perhaps they do, but if they do know it, they surely don't want people to get this right. So obviously, the easiest thing to do would be to put the head down in Abydos. Everybody gets confused and they can't solve any more of the puzzle. And you can try as you may. You can turn this Nile upside down all you want to, and you will not get it to work. It will not fit. And we've already shown how this Nile Delta is only one scale of it. We even had a larger scale when we took a look at this area over here in Jordan. So the final straw here is that clearly the Nile and the Nile Delta is visually, even to phi, being mapped to the human body, where the head is located in the very center of the Nile Delta, where the area that you see from Alexandria up to here and down to somewhere around Memphis creates the same triangle that you see right here. So we have a fractal, a vortex kind of thing going on, and tells us a little bit about our reality. But the purpose of this video was to put that to rest, because I believe that my gut smells a rat, and I believe that there's something that they tried to switch around backwards, because I see this kind of stuff a lot. So anyways, there you go. I hope that helps, and it's amazing what visuals can do for you once you can actually visualize in your head, and you don't have to just associate a body part to a place. You can actually see what's going on by looking at something in your mind's eye. Now you'll understand that when they say something like Busiris, the first thing that will pop into your head will be, well, that's where the head is, and it makes sense because when they talk about this stuff, this is what they're referring to. So you guys have a great day, and I will talk to you soon for the next part of Mapping Osiris.